The case began with the scent of orchids and gunpowder, a contradiction only Nero Wolfe could appreciate. By the time the murderer confessed, Wolfe's brownstone was thick with the perfume of deceit and the faint, bitter aroma of crushed azaleas. Chapter 1. The Woman with the Lily Perfume. It was one of those New York Thursdays that pretends to be spring but smells like wet wool and tax returns. I was at my usual post, behind the desk in Nero Wolfe's office on West 35th Street, flipping through the day's mail and wondering whether the world might collapse if I took a week off. Wolfe was upstairs with his orchids, which meant the building belonged to me until 11 o'clock, unless a client or calamity arrived first. I was halfway through a crossword when the doorbell chimed. The tone was too polite for a bill collector, too soft for Inspector Kramer. I opened the door and discovered both money and trouble, neatly packaged in a single woman. She was tall, slim, and dressed in a gray suit that cost more than Fritz spends on groceries in a week. A short black veil covered half her face, but the half I could see was smooth and pale, the kind that makes a man forget the weather. She carried a faint scent with her, not the usual dime store lavender, but something deeper, floral and mournful. Lilies, maybe? Lilies and smoke. Mr. Wolfe, she said quietly, must see me at once. That was the line every visitor used, and most of them got the same answer. I gave her my patented smile. He's upstairs with his orchids, and that's like saying he's on the moon. He'll be back on Earth around 11. If you'd like to leave a message. She interrupted with a look that could have frozen coffee. This isn't something I can write on a note card, Mr. Goodwin. Archie Goodwin. Secretary, bodyguard, an occasional miracle worker. Why don't you come in and tell me what it's about? I can usually translate mortal peril into something Mr. Wolfe will consider. She hesitated, then stepped inside. As she passed, the perfume hit stronger, not unpleasant, but heavy, as if she'd stepped straight out of a funeral parlor. I led her to the red leather chair across from Wolfe's desk. My name is Mrs. Celia Vaughn, she said, removing her gloves with slow precision. I'm with the Manhattan Horticultural Society. That got my attention. Wolfe's heart beats faster for only three things: beer, orchids, and food, in that order. The mention of horticulture could earn her at least an interview. I see. And what brings the Society's finest to our modest brownstone? Her fingers trembled slightly as she set her gloves down. Our president, Mr. Harold Deems, was found dead this morning in the conservatory. The police believe it was suicide. I don't. I leaned forward. Poison? Gun? Garden hoe? Poison, she said. Tea laced with oleander extract. I let out a low whistle. That's not an amateur's choice. She nodded. Mr. Deems knew better. He lectured regularly on toxic plants. He would never have made such a mistake. That made two of us. I pressed the intercom. Wolfe? A lady with horticultural credentials, a dead botanist, and oleander tea. Do I tempt you? A long silence followed. Then, Wolfe's voice, deep and drowsy as a grizzly's growl. Archie, send her to the office. Immediately. He must have been halfway down the stairs already, because by the time I ushered her in, he'd entered, a bulk of humanity in a canary yellow vest, moving like an ocean liner docking for tea. He settled behind his desk and examined her as though she were a rare specimen. Mrs. Vaughn, he said, you have the distinct advantage of appealing to two of my weaknesses, flowers and curiosity. Please proceed. She did. Her husband had died 2 years earlier, she said, and since then she'd thrown herself into the Horticultural Society's work. Harold Deems, the late president, had been a respected botanist, though privately disliked. He was strict, egotistical, and known for uncovering the Society's more creative bookkeeping practices. Yesterday, she continued, he informed us he'd discovered something, irregularities in our financial records. He refused to elaborate until today's board meeting. And then, her voice trembled. He never made it. He arrived early to prepare the conservatory. By the time others joined him, he was slumped in his chair. Dead. Tea poisoned with oleander. Wolfe mused, his eyes half closed. You say the police have ruled suicide? Yes. There was an empty vial of extract in his coat pocket. They believe he mixed it himself. Convenient, Wolfe murmured. Too convenient. Archie? Yeah? Get details. Names of the board members, servants, and any who entered that room today. I took out my notebook. She listed them: Dr. Edwin Lang, Vice President; Marjorie Deems, widow of the deceased; Tobias Crane, the head gardener; and herself. Wolfe's eyelids twitched, a signal that his mind had already gone to work. The extract, he asked, was kept where? In the Society's chemical cabinet, she said. Accessible to our botanists. Locked, but many had keys. Of course. Wolfe's eyes opened fully now. And you, Mrs. Vaughn, why come to me? Because, she said quietly, Harold Deems was not only my colleague. He was my friend. And last night he called me. He said, Celia, I've found the proof. Tomorrow, I expose everything. She swallowed hard. He never told me what. But I believe someone killed him to stop him. Silence filled the room. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen. Wolfe finally spoke. You understand, Mrs. Vaughn, I detest being drawn into murder. It disrupts my digestion. I understand, she said. But I can pay your fee. He gave a curt nod. That is a persuasive argument. Archie will accompany you tomorrow to the Society's premises. I will remain here and think. She exhaled, relieved. Thank you, Mr. Wolfe. Do not thank me yet, he said dryly. If you are wrong, if this is indeed suicide, you will have paid handsomely for disappointment. She rose, replaced her gloves, and left behind the faint trace of lilies that seemed to linger long after the door closed. Wolfe frowned. Archie, that perfume. Lily, yes, but adulterated. Something sharper beneath. An artificial blend, perhaps with nerium oil. I looked up from my notes. Meaning? He grunted. Meaning she chooses her fragrances as carelessly as her associations. A curious woman. Possibly dangerous. I grinned. So she's your type. He glared. Pfui. My type does not wear perfume. It interferes with the orchids. I stretched and reached for my hat. I'll head to the Society in the morning, see what's blooming besides corpses. Do so, Wolfe murmured. And Archie. Yeah? Observe with your eyes, not your heart. A woman who smells of lilies often carries thorns. Chapter 2. The Blossoms of Betrayal. The next morning, the city smelled of rain-soaked asphalt and roasted chestnuts from a street vendor near 34th. I hailed a cab and made my way to the Manhattan Horticultural Society's greenhouse. A glass and steel building, pristine from the outside, but inside, the air was a mix of damp earth, fertilizers, and ambition, a heady cocktail for anyone with a sensitive nose. I was greeted at the entrance by a young man with a clipboard and a perpetually nervous expression. He introduced himself as Jonathan Mills, assistant to the Society's secretary. You're here for Mrs. Vaughn's case? He asked, eyes darting as if expecting someone to leap from the azaleas. Yes, I said. And you'll be showing me the scene of the crime? He led me through a labyrinth of orchids, ferns, and topiary hedges that would make Versailles look like a backyard garden. The conservatory was at the far end, a high-ceilinged room of glass and iron, sunlight spilling in on rows of exotic plants, the smell of soil thick and rich. At the center, where Harold Deems had been found, stood a large mahogany table surrounded by chairs. A single cup, still slightly stained, waited on a saucer as though time itself had frozen the moment. I noted 3 people nearby. One was a small, tightly wound man with round spectacles and a lab coat, Dr. Edwin Lang, vice president and resident botanist. The second was a tall, elegant woman in a green silk dress, Marjorie Deems, the widow. She stood near the windows, arms crossed, watching the shadows play across the ferns. The third was a burly man with soil under his fingernails, Tobias Crane, head gardener, silently pruning a boxwood topiary with exacting precision. I introduced myself lightly. Archie Goodwin. Mrs. Vaughn sent me to collect some facts before Mr. Wolfe arrives. Lang adjusted his spectacles nervously. Facts, he said, voice tight. Yes, well, you should know, Mr. Deems, he was meticulous. Always checking, double-checking. Someone would have had to be very bold to poison him. I raised an eyebrow. Bolder than you? Or someone who knows him very well? He flinched. Possibly both. But none of us could imagine a tea prepared under my supervision, in my own lab. He trailed off, glancing at the table, at the cup, at the faint residue on the saucer. Marjorie Deem's voice cut in, smooth and deliberate. Bold? Perhaps. But not impossible. Harold had enemies. Everyone does, Mr. Goodwin. Even those who pretend to love him. Her gaze lingered on Tobias Crane, who merely looked at the floor. He was clearly accustomed to being invisible, but there was a tension in the way he held the shears, tight, controlled. My instincts hummed. One of these three had motive. Perhaps all three. But only one had opportunity. I circled the table. The cup. I picked it up gingerly with a gloved hand, turning it to the light. A faint residue clung to the rim. Oleander. Deadly. Beautiful, poisonous, and easy to underestimate. I sniffed, careful. Nothing more than soil and faint floral undertones. Whoever did this knew their chemistry. Not just botany. Chemistry. Lang cleared his throat. You mean to say, someone in this very room? Possibly, I said. Or someone who can enter as though invisible. Was there anyone outside the board meeting who might have had access to the room and to him personally? Lang's lips tightened. No one, aside from staff. Security is tight. Marjorie gave me a small, almost imperceptible smile. Security is tight, yes. But hearts are open, sometimes too open. I wrote a note, widow speaks in riddles, but that's nothing new. Tobias Crane finally looked up, dark eyes wary. I didn't touch the tea. Never saw it prepared. I'm a gardener, not a poisoner. His voice was steady, though his knuckles were white around the shears. I nodded. Sure. That's what they all say. I stepped outside for a moment, drawing in a lungful of damp air. Something nagged me, the way Marjorie watched Crane, the nervous flutter in Lang's spectacles, and the subtle lily scent lingering in the conservatory, though no lilies were in bloom. I jotted notes quickly, my mind connecting dots Wolfe would later admire, the poison itself, access to the room, the timing, and a subtle scent trail, someone wearing perfume that doubled as a chemical signature. Back inside, I spoke to Mrs. Vaughn briefly over the phone. She insisted she was certain this was murder, not suicide, and that she had come to Wolfe for exactly that reason. He would have been too careful, she said, voice taut. He never would have poisoned himself. I agreed. And yet, as I glanced at the trio in the conservatory, I realized that the danger was not just in who might have killed him, but in who was still capable of striking, if cornered. By noon, Wolfe called from the brownstone. Archie, return immediately. Gather the facts, yes, but observe carefully, the scent of lilies is rarely innocent. Something in the conservatory smells of betrayal. Return. I looked around the greenhouse once more. The sunlight fell on the polished table, the empty cup, the three suspects who looked ordinary, harmless even, yet one of them had murdered a man and left a trail visible only to the nose, the mind, and Wolfe. I straightened my hat, buttoned my coat, and prepared to race back. One murder solved? Hardly. One murder uncovered was like opening a bud only to find a snake coiled inside. And Wolfe would see it all, in time. Chapter 3: The Garden of Lies. By the time I returned to West 35th Street, the city had baked in the late afternoon sun, and Wolfe was already in the office, half hidden behind a mountain of correspondence and the faint aroma of orchids. He didn't look up immediately. He never did. One eyebrow lifted only slightly as I stepped in, dusted off my coat, and began my report. 3 suspects, Wolfe. Dr. Lang, Widow Marjorie Deems, and Tobias Crane. All claim innocence. Conservatory, rich smell of soil, faint floral undertones, oleander residue on the cup. Security tight, yet someone had free access. And, I added, lowering my voice, there's that perfume. Lily, but adulterated, artificial. Something stronger beneath. Wolfe hummed, a sound like a low-pressure storm over a glacier. Good. And did you observe behavior? Lang is nervous. Constantly adjusts glasses. Marjorie seems calm, maybe too calm. Tobias prunes as though slicing guilt from the plants themselves. Wolfe folded his massive hands. Archie, people tell the truth in action long before their lips betray them. The gardener, the widow, the botanist, all have secrets. We must see whose secret is mortal. He leaned back, closed his eyes, and muttered something about soil acidity and human frailty. I decided to give him time, and went to check the conservatory's security logs. Nothing unusual. The room was locked, the key accounted for, the main entrance camera showed no unauthorized entry. It had to be someone present at the meeting, someone with motive and opportunity. That evening, I returned to the brownstone with more information. Harold Deems had been investigating embezzlement within the society. Only a handful of people had access to financial records: Lang, Mrs. Vaughn, Marjorie Deems herself, and a few junior staffers, none of whom could enter the conservatory without being noticed. Wolfe didn't react immediately. He was pacing his orchid rooms, the faint green glow of the plants illuminating his massive frame. He finally spoke without looking at me. Embezzlement, he murmured. Ah, yes. Money as motive is always predictable. But the means, oleander and tea, reveals knowledge beyond mere bookkeeping. The murderer is both familiar with toxins and capable of subtle deception. Do you see, Archie? Knowledge of plants is as telling as fingerprints. I nodded, mentally cataloging suspects. Only Lang and Crane were trained with such knowledge, though Marjorie had been present in many board meetings. Could she have learned enough to execute this flawlessly? The next morning, Wolfe instructed me to fetch Dr. Edwin Lang to the brownstone. When Lang arrived, he looked as though someone had spun him in a dryer for 3 hours. Sit, Wolfe commanded. Now, Dr. Lang, you are a botanist. You know oleander. You also know lilies. He paused for effect. You understand their chemical compounds, yes? Lang swallowed. Yes, of course. Oleander is toxic. A small amount can kill. Lilies are generally harmless, except certain artificial perfumes that mimic floral oils. Wolfe leaned forward, voice silky and cold. Precisely. And Mrs. Vaughn, you have claimed loyalty to the society and grief over Mr. Deems. But I smell the same combination on her as on the oleander cup. Methyl salicylate, with traces of oleander. A faint but deliberate signature. Lang's eyes widened. You mean, you think she? She is a person of interest, yes. But we must verify, not accuse prematurely. Wolfe's tone sharpened. I have already instructed Archie to take careful notes. You will cooperate fully, Dr. Lang, lest you appear complicit. Lang nodded rapidly. Of course. I swear I had nothing to do with it. Wolfe's gaze shifted toward me. Archie, the widow may seem calm, but all calm is suspect until proven otherwise. Observe her gestures, her eyes, the way she touches objects. Humans are not trained as masks. Their actions betray them sooner than their words. Over the next 2 days, I followed Wolfe's instructions to the letter. I observed Marjorie Deems during board meetings and casual encounters. She smiled too precisely, held herself with rigid grace, and avoided the cups of tea like a child avoids broken glass. Lang wandered like a trapped animal, eyes flicking toward her repeatedly. Crane worked silently, meticulous, yet his hands revealed a subtle tremor, the kind a guilty man gets when handling objects that could incriminate him. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe sat in his chair, an imposing figure framed by orchids. Archie, I believe the murder's signature is botanical, but the motive is personal. Observe, the widow's eyes dart to Lang when finance is mentioned. The gardener's hands tighten when her presence is noted. Both could act, both could hesitate. But only one understands how to execute a perfect poisoning in plain sight. I grinned. Sounds like we're narrowing the field. Wolfe's gaze returned to the orchids. Narrowing, yes. But human deception is layered. One must peel each layer carefully, like removing petals to reveal the stinger beneath. Tomorrow, Archie, I will need precise details. Who served the tea? Who touched the cup? Who lingered behind? Every gesture matters. Every flower whispers truth if you listen closely. I took a last look at him and his orchids. Wolfe smelled the truth before it arrived. I merely recorded it. Yet even I knew this murder was far from simple. And when it ended, someone's thorns would be revealed in full. Chapter 4. The Scent of Revenge. The day of reckoning arrived with a gray sky that promised rain and suspicion in equal measure. Wolfe, as usual, remained upstairs with his orchids, a fortress of leaves and petals, while I set about arranging the suspects in the office for what Wolfe referred to as a delicate experiment in human observation. By mid-afternoon, Dr. Edwin Lang, Marjorie Deems, Tobias Crane, and Mrs. Celia Vaughan were assembled. Each occupied a specific chair around Wolfe's mahogany desk, chosen, I later learned, with surgical precision. The widow's green dress contrasted sharply against the brown leather of Wolfe's furniture. Lang fidgeted. Crane looked like a man waiting for a storm to pass. And Mrs. Vaughan, well, she smelled of lilies. But Wolfe had already told me that fragrance was an artificial mask hiding something far more insidious. Wolfe entered last, carrying his customary air of impenetrable calm. He sat behind the desk, steepled fingers resting on the polished surface, and looked at the group as one might inspect a particularly challenging orchid. Then he spoke, low and deliberate. Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to discuss the death of Mr. Harold Deems. A man meticulous, careful, observant, and I regret to say, murdered. Or at least poisoned. And the method is critical to understanding the mind of the murderer. He paused, letting the silence settle like a fog over the room. Mr. Deems was not careless. He would not have consumed tea laced with oleander by accident. Therefore, the poison came from someone who understood both horticulture and human frailty. Someone who knew how to disguise lethal intent beneath a veneer of civility. Lang swallowed audibly. Marjorie crossed her arms. Crane's hands, once steady, were now restless. Mrs. Vaughan's eyes flickered, just slightly. The cup from which Mr. Deems drank, Wolfe continued, was handled with care. Gloves were removed. Tea was poured. The poison transferred by touch. Not by accident. Not by oversight. By design. All eyes shifted to Mrs. Vaughan. She stiffened. Mr. Wolfe, that's preposterous. I came here for advice, not accusation. Wolfe's gaze didn't waver. Observe, Archie. Calm is the refuge of the guilty. He turned to the group. The signature of this crime is botanical. Lily oil mingled with oleander compounds. Faint, subtle, detectable only to a trained nose. And I have detected it. On Mrs. Vaughan. The room went silent, except for the soft ticking of Wolfe's office clock. Mrs. Vaughan paled. You can't prove. Proof, Wolfe interrupted smoothly, is in the details. The clasp of your purse contained trace residue. The gloves you removed carried the lethal element. You touched the cup, yes, as an innocent woman consoling a friend. But in truth, you executed your plan with precision. Her voice dropped to a hiss. He deserved it. Harold ruined me. He discovered the misappropriation of funds. He was going to destroy my reputation. I tried to reason with him. I begged him to leave my career intact, and he refused. Lang's eyes widened. You killed him? Yes, she admitted, voice trembling but firm. I knew the poison, I knew the chemistry, and I knew the moment to strike. It was revenge. That's all it ever was. Crane's face remained impassive, though a flicker of relief passed over him. Wolfe's gaze shifted to the remaining two, noting their reactions with meticulous attention. The gardener, the vice president, observers. Participants in the scene, yes, but not the orchestrators of death. Only one mind combined knowledge, motive, and opportunity. Marjorie Deems, who had remained silent, finally spoke. I should have suspected. The scent, the control, the calm. Everything about her screamed calculation. Wolfe leaned back. Indeed. Observation is our greatest ally. Humans cannot escape their nature. Even among flowers, thorns reveal themselves when closely examined. Mrs. Vaughn was escorted by the police soon afterward. Wolfe returned to the orchid rooms, humming softly, a private celebration, the only noise permissible when the world has been set aright. I poured myself a drink and leaned against the desk. You knew the moment she walked in, I said. Wolfe's eyes twitched toward me. The perfume, he said. The lilies, the oleander compound. A trained nose notices, Archie. And a trained mind observes. The rest is verification. I shook my head, impressed despite myself. You solved it by smell and deduction. You're unbelievable. He allowed himself a faint smirk. Archie, deduction is merely the exercise of noticing what others overlook. Observation and patience, that is all. I poured myself another drink. And the widow's thorns? Wolfe glanced at the orchids, their delicate faces basking in the late afternoon sun. She will bloom again in society's court, perhaps. But let her actions remain rooted in consequence. Even among flowers, vengeance has a cost. Chapter 5, The Orchids of Justice. The evening settled over West 35th Street like a velvet curtain, soft, dark, and unyielding. Wolfe was back among his orchids, a kingdom of green and gold, the only place where his mind could untangle human deceit without distraction. I, of course, hovered nearby, not out of necessity, but out of habit, an occasional amusement at his towering genius. The case of Harold Deems was technically closed, with Mrs. Celia Vaughn in custody, yet Wolfe's eyes betrayed a restlessness. He always said murder is easy, understanding motive is an art. Archie, he began, his voice low and precise. Let us review what we know. I nodded, taking careful mental notes. Victim, Harold Deems, president of the Manhattan Horticultural Society. Cause of death, oleander poisoning. Suspects, Dr. Lang, Marjorie Deems, Tobias Crane, and Mrs. Vaughn. Motive, financial revenge. Means, knowledge of toxins and horticulture. Opportunity, board meeting and access to the conservatory. Correct. And the signature? Wolfe asked, tapping a finger against his chin. Lily perfume adulterated with oleander compounds, I said. Precisely. But there is more, he murmured. Observation and deduction tell us the rest. He rose and moved to the window, peering at the city below. Marjorie's calm, Lang's nervousness, Crane's hands, all distractions. Observe carefully, humans will reveal themselves not through words, but action, hesitation, and scent. Even Mrs. Vaughn could not mask the subtle betrayal of her movements, the traces left upon objects she touched. I poured myself a drink. So she did it. Straightforward. Case closed, right? Wolfe's smirk was faint, but unmistakable. Do not be so hasty, Archie. In matters of human deception, closure is never immediate. Consider, the widow's eyes lingered on Lang. The gardener's hands trembled not from guilt, but anticipation. Both knew. Both feared the true consequences. I frowned. You mean there's more? Always more. Observe, Wolfe said, directing my attention to the orchids. Human motives are layered like petals. The outer flower may be beautiful, the inner stinger lethal. Mrs. Vaughn acted for revenge, yes, but she was guided, subtly, by knowledge imparted by another, Dr. Lang. I blinked. Lang? The botanist? Yes. He knew her perfume, her habits, even her preferred gloves. He gave her just enough information to execute the murder, without touching the crime himself. A brilliant act of manipulation. Witnesses see the outward hand, the mind behind it remains invisible. I leaned back. So the murder is the mind, but the hands did the deed. Classic Wolfe. Observation is key. he said. Mrs. Vaughn served as agent. Lang orchestrated. But the brilliance of the plan is the moral ambiguity. Without her act, Lang's embezzlement would remain undiscovered. Her vengeance, his deceit, intertwined. A knock at the door announced Inspector Kramer. Wolfe did not rise. "Inspector, what brings you to my orchid sanctuary?" Kramer, always impatient, scowled. "I came to inform you, case closed." Vaughn confessed. "Everything accounted for." Wolfe waved a hand. "Confession, yes. But do you understand the layers, Kramer? Observe the humans you pursue. One's mind may command another's hand. Motive is a garden, the flowers are visible, but the roots are concealed." Kramer muttered something about Wolfe's eccentricities and left, muttering about paperwork and court. I turned to Wolfe. "So the twist, Lang's involvement?" He nodded, settling back among his orchids. "A whisper of influence, a shadow of intent. The cleverest murders are those where guilt is diffused, leaving only what is seen and not what is thought." I laughed. "So the orchids got another victory." He allowed a faint grin. "Archie, the orchids, like truth, require patience. And vigilance. Humans, unlike plants, make mistakes. But when they do, we must notice." I poured myself one last drink, surveying Wolfe and his verdant kingdom. Justice, subtle and precise, had been served. And as always, Wolfe's brilliance ensured that the smallest detail, the faint scent of lilies, the trembling of a hand, the glance of an eye, was sufficient to reveal the whole story. "Case closed, Wolfe?" I asked. He glanced at me, eyes half-lidded, voice a low rumble. "For now, Archie. But remember, even among flowers, vengeance blooms. And thorns remain." I shook my head, smiling. "Only you, Wolfe. Only you." The orchids thrived, the brownstones smelled faintly of lilies and soil, and the city outside continued its oblivious march. Justice, like a rare bloom, had been revealed, quiet, elegant, and utterly Wolfe. The end.